Today, as you know, is Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Tuesday, and tomorrow is Ash Wednesday, and tomorrow morning, for the first time in Australia, Roman Catholic congregations will hear the Mass entirely in English. It's one of the signs of change in the Church which annoys some Catholic conservatives while leaving some radicals still dissatisfied. From them, there are demands for more fundamental changes in rules hallowed by tradition. And the most startling demand appeared in this letter, recently published in the Sydney Morning Herald. A Catholic priest confessed that he was in love with a woman and wanted to marry her, but not at the penalty of being debarred from the exercise of his ministry. He wrote, "Against the mind and better judgments of her compassionate Lord, the Church still presents a rigid and heartless front." This priest remained anonymous, signing himself Pastor Non Malus, and perhaps others in the same dilemma have kept silence. But in Sydney, Gerald Stone found two people prepared to talk and to be named. Here's his story.
They could be any suburban couple out for a stroll. But Bill Dickerson was a Roman Catholic priest for 20 years before he married. His wife, Sandra, was a nun for 7 years. The Dickersons are American. They came to Australia as migrants 10 months ago. Their daughter, 3-month-old Shannon, was born in Sydney. The family lives in a neat rented cottage in the northern suburbs. He works as a psychologist.
How long ago was it, Bill, that you left the priesthood?
Well, it was slightly over a year ago, January the 10th.
What were you doing at the time?
I was teaching at St. Martin's College. I was the head of the psychology department.
After so long in the priesthood, it must have been a hard personal decision for you to leave.
Well, it was, in a way. I had made up my mind in the fall of that year to leave the priesthood, but it was at that time that I left and intended to marry.
Sandy, you were a nun. What order did you belong to?
I was a Benedictine.
And it must have been also a very hard decision for you to leave the order.
Yes, it was, because I enjoyed the work of teaching very much, but as far as personal religious life went, I thought there was a great conflict, and it did take me about 3 years to settle it, if I actually left.
Well, was the idea of marriage with Bill the reason why you left?
No. Well, he was my psychology professor at the university. I had known him 4 years ahead of time. But we had nothing to do with each other. I saw him very seldom, except during class, up to that time. Well, when I was trying to make up my mind whether or not to leave, my superior, as a matter of fact, sent me over to see Bill, because he did a lot of counseling.
This was to decide whether to take your
vows?
Yes,
it was what we called a junior sister at the time. It was 3 years after first vows, and before you made up your mind whether or not to take final vows. And I was having a hard time to decide, and she thought that Bill, since he was a religious and also a psychologist, would be the best person to advise me.
And how did he advise you to take your final vows?
Well, he told me that we talked over all the problems that concerned me, and then, like he always says, I mean, you have to make up your own decisions, and he advised me to do whatever I felt was really best, and so I decided at that time to go ahead.
What was the reaction of your fellow priests and your superiors?
I don't think that it changed the attitude, the personal attitude of these people. I mean, people are people no matter where they are, and in a religious order, they're the same way. I think some of these public attitudes that people have are kind of hard to understand, but I mean, I don't think I've lost any friends. In fact, I was open about it. I told them ahead of time, I told them a whole year ahead of time that I intended to leave, and the minute I decided to marry, I announced it to my class, I announced it to my superiors, I told everybody.
And their reaction was one of sympathy, was it, in the main?
I don't think it was sympathy. It was, they just accepted it. What else could they do? I mean, you know, if this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do.
Well, I take it that the decision followed a great deal of soul-searching on your part. When you became a priest, you swore the vows of celibacy.
Yes, but when I became a priest because I wanted to become a priest. I knew what I was doing, and I deliberately went into the priesthood with the idea of serving God and helping people, and I believe that I spent my life that way. And I don't regret anything that I've done. I don't regret those 27 years in the priesthood. In fact, I think it was worth waiting 27 years for Sandy here.
And you say 27 years in the priesthood, 20 years in the priesthood and 7 years as a member of the order.
Yes, that's right.
And can you tell us what your status is now as far as the church's attitude toward you?
Well, officially, I believe that I'm excommunicated, but I know that it's possible to have our marriage fixed up. There's a priest of the same community left at the same time, and he was married, as it were, outside the church after I was, and his marriage is fixed up already in the eyes of the church, and he sent me the documents signed by the Archbishop of Seattle showing that he was married in the church. We're still waiting, though.
Waiting what?
For official permission to marry within the church.
Could you tell us how you've applied for that?
Well, we started the process through our superior, the abbot, and then it went to St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota, and it was carried from there to Rome. And we don't know what has happened to it from there. The procedure has bogged down. And when we came to Australia, we went to see Cardinal Gilroy, and he suggested that since the process has already been started through the order, we should leave it that way. But he wished us the best, and he said that he hoped everything worked out well for us.
Well, what are some of the steps that you needed to make in this application?
Well, we had to make arrangements to see 2 psychiatrists. And these psychiatrists, I don't know what purpose they would serve. Probably to show that you didn't have, couldn't make a free decision when you went into the order. But I don't feel that way. I feel that when I went into the order, I knew what I was doing, I made a free decision, and I made a responsible decision. I went in there with full knowledge that you couldn't get married, but it is a disciplinary law, and since it's a disciplinary law, it's subject to change. But now they've had this council under Pope John the 23rd, and they were to reconsider some of these disciplinary laws, but I could see that they were eliminating discussion on this particular problem, on celibacy. And in my eyes, it looks as if the conservatives of the church are trying to make a divine law of a disciplinary law. And I think that they are disobedient in what they are doing. And I believe, you know, looking at Hitler and what has happened with the Jews, I think an individual has a responsibility to take action under those, and silence or not to do something is to give consent to this type of activity.
Well, generally, would you say that there are many priests, to your direct knowledge, who have left the priesthood to get married or for reasons of marriage?
I know of at least 5 priests who have left, but they didn't leave to get married. I didn't even leave to get married. I left because I felt that disciplinary laws of the church were not allowed to be discussed. Celibacy is just one of them. For example, eating meat on Friday. You notice the Catholics in Australia eat meat on Friday. Well, all of a sudden, it just isn't part of their doctrine of the Catholic Church. It's a disciplinary law. It's one that is subject to change. Now, even the law of celibacy never has been a universal disciplinary law of the Catholic Church. I believe that any disciplinary law has to be of such nature that it can be discussed and changed. And I think the conservatives in the church were suppressing free expression. I think a good example of how they were suppressing it, they took up a poll in the Seattle Diocese, and over 86% of the priests are in favor of the possibility of priests getting married, and there's no action. When they have these meetings, they don't allow celibacy to be discussed.
In your own eyes, do you still consider yourselves good, loyal Catholics?
Yes, I feel as if I'm a good, loyal Catholic. I feel that our marriage will be fixed up someday in the church. But in the meantime, I feel as if I'm married to Sandy. I'm very happy being married. I think it's very natural to be married and have children. We have one child already, 3 months old, and I think we're going to have a little brother or sister pretty soon.
Oh, that's very good. And do you go to church yourself regularly?
We do, yeah.
But are you allowed to take sacraments?
No, we're not allowed to receive communion, but I'm sure that we will be someday.
Could I ask you this? If the church law ever were to change and celibacy were eliminated, would you yourself like to go back to priesthood, to become a practicing priest?
Yes, I enjoyed the work as a priest, and we've already talked to some missionaries about the possibility of becoming missionaries if permission could be made or arranged so that as married clergy we could function someplace.
Do you consider yourself morally and spiritually qualified to be a practicing priest?
I don't see how I could lose my qualifications that fast. And the work I'm doing right now is I mean, you're helping people, and if you're helping people, it doesn't make any difference what way you do this. I think, I feel as if I'm doing the same thing as I've been doing all the time.
Yes. Sandy, do you consider your baby born legitimately in the eyes of God?
Oh, yes. She's baptized now, so, I mean, I plan to raise her as a Christian. And as far as the status of the Catholics go, I think to some Catholics we would be renegades. But I think that we're trying to be honest, and I think there's a new breed of Catholics emerging that want to take responsibility for their own actions. And they might seem to go against the laws of the church sometimes, but I think they're being honest to themselves, and I consider myself a Catholic and a Christian.